In the world of Tensida, there exists an absolute unbendable rule. One that not only surpasses the very laws of nature, but also bypasses their very purpose completely. For those who are lucky enough to have reached a level in which this rule applies to them, well, these laws of nature would then become nothing more than unique cases to them. Mere fundamentals of the world that could simply be ignored or manipulated. So, if you haven't guessed already, the rule I'm talking about here is the one that dictates that ultimate skills are the ultimate power. The unrivaled ability to treat the very laws of nature as nothing more than trivial suggestions. Of course, the extent to which that's possible varies from person to person, but the key idea here is that an ultimate skill can only be countered by another ultimate skill. That's why any person who possesses one is considered to be extremely powerful, much to the point that even someone like Guy tends to hold them in very high regard. That said, the odds of coming into possession of one is extremely rare. One could even go through the whole process of evolving into a true awakened demon lord and still come out with no ultimate skills whatsoever. So, for Rimuru to end up with 2 right after his own, and then go on to acquire 2 more almost immediately after, well, that's probably one of the most rare events to occur, well, ever. We don't know how many ultimate skills anybody else possesses, but I think it's safe to assume that 4 is kind of on the high end. In any case, these are the pillars that support the foundations of Rimuru's strength as a demon lord. Whereas his previous self was OP due to all his unique skills, the Demon Slime Rimuru is even more OP due to his ultimate skills. And that's exactly what we're going to look at here. Starting with the one that we're most familiar with, first we have the evolution of Great Sage Raphael, the Lord of Wisdom whose very purpose is to fulfill the wishes of its master. When this ultimate skill had been created, a large majority of Rimuru's old skills were brought together under the management of this single one. So, even though a powerful unique skill like Degenerate was sacrificed to create this one, its abilities of Synthesis and Separate were just moved to be part of Raphael instead, making for a total of 8 different components that go towards piecing together this conceptual intelligence's overpowered arsenal of abilities. Now, a lot of these you will recognize as being similar to the subskills that we talked about from the previous Rimuru videos. While most still pretty much do the exact same thing, there are others that have had some pretty significant performance improvements. Mind Accelerate is the evolved version of Great Sage's Hasten Thought. Whereas Hasten Thought increased Rimuru's ability to perceive things by a factor of 1,000, Mind Accelerate bumped that factor up to 1,000,000. It extended the rate at which he could think to such an inconceivably rapid level of performance that whenever it was used it made it seem as if time itself had stopped. Combine this with his other subskill of Parallel Operation, and we now have a Rimuru who's more than capable of using Analyze and Assess on multiple targets at this improved rate of 1,000,000, allowing for the instantaneous scan of literally anything and everything. So, whenever you see those moments where Raphael is giving its analysis to Rimuru, you can usually assume that the entire encounter lasts for at most a fraction of a second. That's just how fast Rimuru and Raphael can process things now. 1 second to them now feels more like 277. Cast Cancel does the same thing as it did before, effectively negating the need for a chant whenever magic's being cast. All of Creation still allows for the comprehension of what's pretty much everything, then Synthesis and Separate remains completely unchanged. As for the final subskill of Ability Adjust, well, as the only new subskill to emerge from Great Sage's evolution, not much has really been done to give us a proper picture of what it's actually capable of. Since it was used to assist with the establishment of Uriel though, we can surmise that it grants Rimuru the ability to modify his existing set of skills. Whether they be skills belonging to his subordinates or any of the previous ones that he's had before, it seems that Rimuru can use Ability Adjust to modify, consolidate, and even evolve them, making it one of the more versatile assets in Raphael's arsenal. Now, the ultimate skill that Rimuru had picked up next was none other than the evolution of Gluttony Belzebub. And just like how it was with Raphael, the unique skill Merciless was sacrificed to create this one, resulting in its soul-consuming ability to be passed on as a subskill. Before we get to that though, there were a few buffs given to the base effects of Predation and Stomach. Predation was given a significantly increased range of effect, and Stomach can now store approximately 10 times more than it could before. Had Stomach not been enhanced like the way it had, then Rimuru wasn't even sure he would have been able to handle the strain of releasing Veldora from it. So it was a crucial upgrade that you'll soon see had actually played quite a big role. As for the other 2 base effects of Mimicry and Isolation, The former can still replicate the appearance and skills of any analyzed target, while the latter continues to recycle any sort of materials deemed unnecessary during an analysis. Corrosion provides assistive decomposition effects during any instance of predation, then soul consumption is just the new name given to Merciless. So, despite Merciless having been sacrificed for Beelzebub's creation, the ability to reap the souls of those who have lost their will to fight is now just integrated under Beelzebub's subskill Soul Consumption. Now, where Beelzebub brings forth something new is through the establishment of the subskill food chain from the merger of what was previously Gluttony's Receive and Provide. Remember, Receive was the ability for Rimuru to claim any of his subordinates' abilities as his own, while Provide allowed for the transfer of his skills down to subordinates who were compatible. That being the case, it makes sense then that food chain does a more efficient combination of both. For any monster who shares a connection with Rimuru, all skills in their original form would instantly become available to him. Kind of like a Path of Exile skill tree but with infinite unlock points. And also a lot bigger. With all his subordinates having received gifts from the Harvest Festival, there was a whole new plethora of skills that needed to be managed by Raphael and its ability adjust. You see, Raphael is subject to food chain at the same level that Rimuru is. So that meant all those skills could be streamlined and optimized in whatever way Raphael deemed best. If there was ever a situation in which Rimuru found himself in trouble, then he could simply rely on Raphael to suggest a plan of action with whatever skills were optimal for the situation. It was the only way Rimuru could make use of food chain and the vast amount of skills it provided. As for how it works for those under Rimuru, well, that same condition of compatibility is still required, making it a much more beneficial skill for Rimuru than it is for really anyone else. Now, just like how Raphael had brought forth the creation of Beelzebub, it was Beelzebub that had allowed for the creation of Rimuru's next ultimate skills, the first of which had stemmed from Veldora's resurrection. When Rimuru had released Veldora's spiritual body from the confines of his stomach, there were these lingering remnants of his essence that were left behind, remains of his spiritual body that could be consumed by Beelzebub. So, after those remains were absorbed and analyzed, not only was a soul corridor established between himself and Veldora, but the ultimate skill Veldora was created from it as well. Rimuru had absorbed small pieces of Veldora, then used the link between their soul to transform some of this true dragon's power to his own. Now, if you're wondering what exactly this soul corridor is, well, it's pretty much the direct intangible pathway between one soul and another. A connection that signifies a deepened bond between two people. So, what was essentially Veldora's heart was now linked to Rimuru's soul, resulting in all his memories and experiences to be gathered in the mind of Rimuru, kind of like some sort of external backup. The reason why this is important is because it ties into the subskills of this new Veldora ultimate skill, mainly the duo of Summon Storm Dragon and Restore Storm Dragon. The former allows Rimuru to call forth Veldora whenever he wants, whether it's the Veldora that's in his dragon form, or the new Veldora that's in his spiritual one. Rimuru can summon one single Veldora at his sole discretion. The reason I say one is because there's no limit to the number of times this skill can be activated, but there is a limit to the number of Veldoras there can be. Only one dragon can be present at any given time. If another is attempted to be summoned, then the first will disappear in order to make room for the other. As for what makes this entire ability possible, well, that's actually mostly due to the passive effect of the second subskill. Because Restore Storm Dragon allows Veldora's memories to be copied over to Rimuru, that meant that if Veldora was to ever die, Rimuru could easily bring him back to life with an exact replacement. I know that may sound a little bit confusing, but the key thing to understand is that this clone is just a vessel. Yes, it does house Veldora and serve as his material body, but what we see is nothing more than a clone he's currently inhabiting through his soul corridor with Rimuru. The real Veldora currently resides within Rimuru's soul. Well, a reproducible backup anyway. So, regardless of what happens to this newly provided body, Veldora can always be given another, essentially making him immortal so long as Rimuru continues to be alive. In any case, this pretty much explains the fundamentals of how Summon Storm Dragon works as well. It's not like Rimuru is physically teleporting Veldora to his exact location, but instead it's more like he's replacing the current Veldora with a new one that's an exact copy of the real Veldora from Rimuru's soul. Now, the third and final subskill to come from the ultimate skill Veldora is complete unprohibited access to the Storm Dragon Magic Archive, a much simpler ability than the other two. All this meant for Rimuru was that he could now use powerful spells like Dark Lightning, Death Calling Wind, and Storm of Destruction, all of which are more powerful in comparison to what he previously had. Moving on to the final ultimate skill in Rimuru's arsenal now. What we have is pretty much the amalgamation of all the skills from Food Chain. Remember, with the Harvest Festival having gifted what was potentially hundreds of new skills to Rimuru's subordinates, that meant they were all being gifted to him as well. Food Chain had provided this massive influx of unique and extra skills that he'd never even seen before. Of course, Rimuru couldn't possibly sift through all of them himself, so instead he just decided to hand the task off to Raphael. The result of which was the massive consolidation of all of them into the ultimate skill Uriel, the Lord of Vows. A skill that serves as both the manifestation and proof of the bond that ties Rimuru to all the others. To explain this even further, Raphael had set up unlimited imprisonment as a base, then used ability adjust to merge that base with everything else. So, whether it be his own personal remaining extra skills or any of the unique skills currently available to him through Food Chain, all were combined under the ever-expanding umbrella of Uriel, specifically the subskill known as Law Manipulation. While this does provide him access to every skill obtained via Food Chain, there's a whole nother side to it that provides even more. One that allows for complete control over every magical and scientific phenomenon. This could be anything from the 4 major elements and the laws that govern them, all the way to the magicules in the air and the spells produced by them. Literally all matter, magic, and particles, along with fundamental properties like heat, inertia, and gravity, could now be freely manipulated by Rimuru whenever he wanted, making this specific subskill one of the most valuable assets currently available to him. Even if you set aside the godlike ability to control pretty much everything, having optimized access to what's now over a dozen different unique skills is definitely something you don't want to overlook as well. Another aspect of Uriel that's just as OP is the spatial domination subskill that had taken over for spatial motion. It's a new and improved version that works much more efficiently as well as requires significantly less setup. Unlike how spatial motion required a gate to link 2 points in space together, spatial domination required only a thought. So long as the location was perceivable with Universal Detect, Rimuru could transport himself there almost immediately. It was the closest thing to instant teleportation that anyone could get to. Now, considering that Uriel was created with unlimited imprisonment as its base, it makes sense then that this unique skill would turn out to become one of Uriel's subskills, thus providing Rimuru with the exact same power that had once sealed away Veldora. In terms of what it actually does though, well, it basically traps any target within a complex number of spatial dimensions. And when I say complex, I don't mean that it's too complicated for us to understand, but instead that the target would literally be encased within a dimension of an imaginary number. That's what it means when it says it's a complex dimension. So, with the target being trapped inside what can only be described as a mathematically imaginary place, any access or interaction to the real world would be impossible. Their plane of existence simply wouldn't coincide with our own, resulting in the target's skills being useless regardless of how strong they were. That being the case, unlimited imprisonment was a barrier in which escape from the inside was wholly impossible. Last but not least, the final subskill of Uriel was the absolute defense of Universal Barrier. Unlike how Multilayer Barrier required each resistance to be imbued individually, Universal Barrier simply did it automatically. Yes, the barrier was still technically multi-layered in nature, but the whole process of setting it up was handled by Raphael now. But yeah, that's every ultimate skill that Rimuru currently has now. As I'm sure you noticed, there's a lot of different things working in tandem to produce these ultimate powers that we see in action in the anime. With Raphael being at the forefront, every other skill is being used at full capacity to provide Rimuru with anything and everything. He may not be as strong as Millimurgi yet, but he's certainly taking his first steps towards something I would personally consider to be akin to godlike.